Please join me in welcoming the filmmaker Julia Verdin, Keith Deidrich of The Gathering in William Baldwin, who narrated, and you saw in the film, and Xander Berkeley, who you also saw in the film. Ty Pennington couldn't make it tonight. Julia, I love the idea that you make a movie about something like a fiction film, and then there's a documentary that you could like watch right afterwards if you're interested in the topic. So please tell me the origins of how this documentary came to be.
Sure. Well, we planned to make the film. I'd given the script to Robert Craig, and they'd liked it and agreed to make it. And then I'd originally suggested that we do a little short educational EPK as a companion piece for the film, which is something I've done before on other social impact projects I've done, and I've always found it works really well to engage with narrative through audiences emotionally connecting with characters, and then once they're interested in a topic, have the follow-up educational piece to go with it. But Robert Craig has a tendency to think big, and so it became a full-fledged documentary. And I have to say it was really almost like a life-changing experience. I met some wonderful individuals on that trip. It was absolutely fascinating, and I feel just so grateful to have had that opportunity to really be able to take a deep dive like that. It's an absolute gift for a filmmaker, because we ended up doing the documentary before we shot the film, which meant I was really able to use all that additional learning to really create a good, authentic environment for the feature film that we made after that.
What was the setup? I mean, how did you make this film? Because it looks like you had a bus and you were going around, and like, what were the nuts and bolts of that?
Oh yeah, no, we were literally in one of those kind of old-fashioned tour buses, and it wasn't a glamorous tour bus. It was a kind of roadies type tour bus, and we were sleeping in bunk beds, so they were kind of like layers of 3 bunk beds, and I was on the middle there. And the first time when I saw this thing, and it was like this, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to fall out of that in the middle of the night. But I was so tired by the end of every day. I just slept like a baby, and it was actually a very smart way to do it, because we'd leave one city, we'd have different bus drivers, and we'd be driving all night while we were sleeping, and then in the morning we'd wake up in a new place and start like a whole new investigation of a new arena. So it actually worked very well.
William and Xander, as actors who take on a role in a movie about it, and then to be involved in a documentary, talk about what your connection to learning about homelessness was through this project. Yeah, maybe like a preconception you had that was disabused of, like what you learned in getting involved with this.
Should I go first? You got a better story. I'll go first. First off, it's just obviously such an honor to be able to participate in a project that you feel might have an impact in lessening the suffering of other people, or having any positive impact in the world. Because we dedicated storytellers, and we hope that at least our stories touch people or move them in some way, but to actually be able to help in any way imaginable is an exceptional opportunity. And for any of us that have lived in an urban world throughout the majority of our adult lives, it's almost inescapable that we've walked by people and felt that pang of, do I give them money? Would I be contributing to their drug and alcohol problems, or I'll just walk away? And then the pang of conscience that says, oh, now what do I do? And I found my way as an individual and as an artist and as an actor to touch lives on a very micro level individually, getting food, finding somebody, being big enough and young enough to feel safe in various areas, and sit down and allow people to feel seen and heard, and get them to tell their story. Maybe I'd draw 'em, maybe I'd just hang out and not say anything. But that was the extent of my experience dealing with homeless people, and then generally feeling like I'm running away from it, and so to have the opportunity to go into it. And that guy over there on his phone with the hat on, that's the guy that put his own personal money into both the feature and the documentary. And it's just so mind-blowing after years of being in Hollywood, where we all talk the talk, but this dude walked the walk, and he put his own money on the line because he couldn't bear to go by the longest contiguous homeless encampment in the world in Sacramento one more day without doing something. And I feel so humbled and so inspired being around people who've dedicated their lives to helping other people, and that's all I got to say. Period.
William?
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, everybody, for coming this evening. And there's a few things that I've taken away from this experience. One is that we don't really have a homeless crisis as much as we have a mental health crisis, and something has to be done about it. There is hope. There's a lot of amazing work going on around the country right now in little pockets, in San Antonio, in Austin, in Pinellas, Florida, at Johns Hopkins. They're doing, in little pockets across the country, they're doing really, really wonderful work with a very impressive track record, getting people back on their feet, independent, self-sufficient, at a rate of 70%. You may have seen in the credits and seen in the documentary, Dr. Robert Marbut, he has people in his facility in San Antonio, 2,700 people per day he's treating, with a 70% success rate. The Gathering Inn up north in Sacramento has a success rate.
Deidrich, Gathering Inn, right here.
Yeah. Your success rate is around 80%, right? 70, 80%?
In one of our programs.
Yeah, in one of the programs. I mean, they're remarkable numbers, but they require 360-degree wraparound care that includes mental health care and job training, job placement. You have to make sure these people are making a livable wage and have affordable housing. And one of the misconceptions, you look at the 1.5 million children that are homeless and the 1.2 million adults, and right away half the list, you say, people want to point the finger and say they got themselves into the situation. Well, 1.5 million of them are children, so clearly it's not their fault. Of the 1.2 million adults, some of them aged out of foster care, as it's demonstrated in our film beautifully. Not their fault. Some of them came out of prison. They were incarcerated. Not their fault. Some of them were PTSD vets. Not their fault. Some of them are addicted. And another major misconception is, they put themselves in that situation by choice. They're doing drugs. That's how they wound up on the street. The fact of the matter is they don't have access to health care. They can't see, like almost everyone in this room, can see a doctor, see their psychologist, see their psychiatrist, get medication for anxiety, for depression, for bipolarity, for schizophrenia, for PTSD, for whatever it is. They have medications that can help you with that may have prevented many of these people from slipping through the cracks and winding up on the streets. And they're self-medicating on the streets with alcohol and fentanyl. And we've been in the trenches with these people where we've seen literally, I've been in many, many shelters and encampments where I've been standing around 20, 30, 40, 50 people where they're all high on fentanyl. And we've watched, a dozen people flatline, and the Narcan was able to help 7, 8, 9, 10 of them recover, and 4 or 5 of them didn't make it. And there's all sorts of, we had these great ideas and these great plans and these well-intended ideas 15 years ago in California with low harm and no harm and housing first. We're realizing that they were very well intended, but they're not working the way we hope they should. So there's this new generation of ideas and energy coming in to sort of course correct on some of the well-intended compassionate programs in the Northwest and in California through the Northwest. And it's going to be very interesting to see if we have the political will between the two parties, we could really address this issue and we could really have a dramatic, impressive reduction in homelessness. Of course, like I said before, compounded and exacerbated by COVID and by the fentanyl crisis. It's the homeless numbers have gone from 54,000 to 76,000 in Los Angeles County alone. So just through COVID.
Keith, as somebody on the ground and seeing this every day and working in this space, what's there to be hopeful about with this problem, and what needs to be really addressed like as quickly as possible?
So thank you for the opportunity to be here as well. What I'm hoping from both the documentary and the movie is that people can put themselves into a character that they see on the screen and see that and come to a realization that I already know, that homelessness can and really does happen to everybody. I have had NBA basketball players come through my door. I had Philadelphia Phillies pitchers come through my door. I've had very successful CEOs come through my door. I've had all kinds of people come through my door. It can literally happen to anybody. One of the things that this country struggles with, and we're actually struggling with it right now in Northern California, is where these great programs, where do you put them? And if you remember the documentary just that you saw, I'm the guy on the Roseville Road, which was the longest linear encampment in the United States. It was 7 miles long, okay? And I'm the guy who was talking about NIMBYism. And NIMBYism is alive and well everywhere across this country. And the reason why it's alive and well is that a lot of people can't put their shoes into the shoes of somebody else because they think it can't happen to them. Therefore, there is something intrinsically wrong with people experiencing homelessness. They have a character defect. There's something wrong with them. Therefore, I don't want that program anywhere near me. So if this project, if this documentary, if this movie can move the needle on people's understanding in this country that it really could happen and open their hearts and minds, making it easier for programs like mine or across the country to be able to put these good programs in to be able to help people experiencing homelessness. That's what I hope.
By the way, NIMBYism, just, I know you all know, but not in my backyard, just in case anybody wanted an interpretation. Not in my backyard. A lot of people.
Thank you.
You were bragging about your degrees or something.
Yeah.
And YIMBY is a word now too, right? Yes, in my backyard, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think YIMBY is a word now. Yeah, so
What's interesting also that I've learned is that people are wondering where you can't when you do wraparound comprehensive 360 care for these people. Clearly, and we're not talking about a week or 2 weeks or even a month. It's 3 months. It's 6 months. It's beyond that. People are saying, how are you going to do that? How are you going to pay for that? Where's the money going to come from? And I'll tell you right now that when you have, I was in Seattle in front of the market on one side of me, the original Starbucks over here, the Nike store over here, and there were 20 people laying on the street, and they were in their own urine and defecation, and they were vomiting, and they were foaming at the mouth, and they were overdosing, and they were being administered Narcan. And the fact of the matter is, what we're doing right now is costing way more. I'm not saying we're not doing anything. I'm not saying we're not doing enough. I'm just saying what we're doing isn't working properly. And when you look at the cost, there was one person they had 6 calls on in one day. Same guy overdosed on fentanyl 6 times in one day. When you have the first responders come, that's the rig with the firemen and the sheriff and the cops and the paramedics and the nonprofits and the faith-based, but all of that costs money. Then they bring them to the emergency room, that costs money. Then they admit them into the hospital, that costs money. Then they go into the legal system, courts, judges, lawyers, it costs money. Then they're incarcerated, that costs money. Your property values are dropping. That's costing money. The Department of Commerce, small businesses, Department of Tourism, all of this is being negatively, adversely affected now more than ever because you have more homeless people in Sacramento, Seattle, Spokane, San Francisco, Los Angeles. And now you have both sides talking, because one side is sort of the more compassionate side and will throw money at the issue. And sometimes I wouldn't say recklessly, it's well intended, but it doesn't work out the way they had planned. And the other side is like, now you've got my attention because it's affecting the bottom line, and you're right, something has to be done about this. So let's have both sides talking to each other so that we can get these people back on track to a life of independence and total self-sufficiency. And thanks to people like this gentleman right here and Robert Craig, we're going to make that happen over the next 5, 10, 15 years for sure. Dramatic improvement.
Julia, when you're putting a film like this together and you're dealing with the fact that it's a complex issue, it's got elements that can lead to despair, like really sad things, but you're also trying to get people motivated and inspired. How do you do all that as a filmmaker?
I think one of the things that I learned, and we were very lucky that Robert Craig was smart enough to bring on a homeless expert to the project. So we had Dr. Robert Marbert, and before we went on the trip, Robert talked to all of us and said, there are a few things that you need to know when you're dealing with people experiencing homelessness. And you had to be very respectful. You don't just barge into someone's tent. You have to respect that that's their home and that's their space. And wait to be invited in, or to say, is it okay if I come and talk to you? And when you approach people in that way, they were all very happy to talk with us. And one of the things that really struck me was the amount of shame that people feel when they're experiencing homelessness. And I found that really heartbreaking, because...
I'm going to just bring that closer to you.
Oh, sorry.
Much better.
Thank you, Xander. They're so used to people kind of looking down at them or kind of stepping over them or looking at them like they've got kind of leprosy. And the more that happens, the more shame you feel. And then you almost kind of become trapped in this cycle that it's very hard to get help because you give up on yourself. And I don't think anyone chooses to be a drug addict, but when people are doing drugs, it usually comes from a place of deep pain, that they don't have access to medication, or they don't have access to any other way of numbing out the pain, so they resort to drugs, and then they get addicted, and then it becomes a cycle, and then you get stuck and you feel worse and worse about yourself. And one of the beautiful things is that when we were visiting some of the facilities and meeting some of the people in recovery, when you hear the stories and you see the change that has taken place, it was really inspiring. Like one of the young men you saw in the documentary who was taking us around one of the facilities. He was maybe about 28 years old, looked like he just stepped out of a J. Crew ad, had this bright, smiley face. And I said to him, how did you end up working here? And he said, Julia, 5 years ago, I was on the streets smoking crack, and I just wanted to die. And I thought I didn't have any hope. Life wasn't worth living. And now, there he is, spending his time helping other people, working in the facility. And a lot of people running these successful non-profit programs were all former addicts who were using their experience to help others. And that seemed to be working very well.
We have time for some questions if people want to. There you go, way in the back. I'll repeat the question.
I want to hear a lot more about Los Angeles. We're here, and there was not a lot of information in the film. The film was fabulous, but there's just so much going on in our city. It's such a disaster. And we've got people in gas stations building their homes like there with trash and everything. And there's just so much going on, and we're not seeing what's going on. I don't know what Karen Bass is right now with all of this. I know she's put people away in places and things like that, but there's thousands of people. It's like a stadium full of people in Los Angeles outside.
The question is about Los Angeles and the situation here, how bad it is.
Can you re-articulate that? I'm so...
Yeah,
I've shot so many guns and been shot
no.
so
She
many
wants
times,
she
I
wants to
have
know
no
about she wants to know more about what the situation is going on in Los Angeles and what's being done about it, because obviously not much is being done.
One of the things that just keeps coming through my mind is that I was brought out from New York to Los Angeles when I was like 22 in 1979, and in 1980, Reagan was elected. And there was a strange relationship between the extreme left in the wake of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. The left wanted to give individual rights and freedoms to everybody. And the right was going, you're right, we should give freedoms to those people and stop funding these lazy, no good, whatever. Whatever the two different extremes were, suddenly a shocking number of people were dumped out of mental hospitals onto the streets. And I was going back and forth as a kid from New York to Los Angeles. This geometric growth of homeless people off their meds, often self-medicating or not. It was such a shock. And I was so like concerned. And then it kind of seemed to, or as I moved up the hill from it over the years, and then in the past 10 years, it just seems like a huge tidal wave of it has returned. And we can say, yeah, they've given one-way tickets to people in the red states to send them all to California and LA so that it'll look bad on us. But one way or another, what seems absolutely inescapable as a truth is that we have a dysfunction in our political system. We're dumping our money. On the left, if we're actors, we're often empaths. Our jobs are putting ourselves in the shoes of others. So we're always feeling for others. And we don't question. I've never questioned paying my taxes. I want to help anybody that needs a hand up. But there's just so much between the powers that be on the left and the right politically. It just seems like it's time for us as individuals to go, we have to work together to solve problems. We've got to stop demonizing one another and stop wasting money and not being held accountable. One way or another, there's too many people suffering. The Reagan thing that I was very suspicious of even as a kid was this idea of trickle down. Well, I think we know because the migration of wealth from the lower to middle class since the late 70s into now is disproportionate to the 0.001%, has a huge dominance of wealth, and we've lost our middle class in a lot of ways, and you can blame it on the right, you can blame it on the left, but that's just what has happened. And there's one way or another, we can see the evidence in this proliferation of homelessness. It's a crisis, and we're all living with it. And this is like one of the highest, the most successful countries in the world, if not the most. How can we do this? And we'll shed our tax money, but we won't walk the walk. And I think one way or another, we have to hold our representatives accountable, and we have to get involved on a personal level as volunteers, as participants in stopping the flow of.
So you were, and that's a great response. That you're asking about Los Angeles and the 70,000 plus people that are experiencing homelessness in Los Angeles, right? And the 40 or so thousand in San Francisco, et cetera, et cetera. So homelessness is a complex issue, but it's not a complicated issue. And what I mean by that is there's an intersection of a lot of things going on here. And what the Some folks like to say it's only housing. If we just build more housing, that's going to take care of it. And to some extent, there's some truth to that. I mean, at the end, you're going to have some housing, right? On the other side, there's like, well, these people, they're just choosing to do that, so kind of why do we help them, right? And then you have the court system. So I'll give you a couple things that needs to change in this country that would impact the number of people experiencing homelessness on the street of Los Angeles, all right? Get the state of California to waive a lot of the regulations around how housing is built to make it more affordable. When you're talking $750,000 a unit for a housing, I mean, California has some money and the federal government has, but you don't have that much money. Do the math. $750,000 times 75,000 people. What's that number? That's a huge number. You can actually do housing in California if you waive some of those regulations for around 100,000. You can. So that's one thing. The second thing is conservatorships. Back to what Xander was talking about. Back in the 60s and 70s, if Uncle Bill was a little off his rocker, you could petition a judge and you can actually get him the help he needed. Now, there was abuses in the system. One flew over the cuckoo's nest, was a big thing. But your mental health beds in this country, walk out the door. That's where they are. They're on the streets of your major cities. Because there's federal funding for more mental health beds as well. Make it a little bit easier. And Billy, you've got some history with this too, if you'd want to share it, I don't know, about conservatorships. That's a huge thing. Housing's a huge thing. And here's the last thing I'd say. My friends on the right like to say housing first never works. They're dead wrong. Okay? My friends on the left say housing first always works. They're dead wrong. They're both dead wrong. Okay? Seriously, they are. Empower your local nonprofits and free up the categorical funding streams. Like when you go to a doctor and you have diabetes, and if Billy goes to a doctor and he has diabetes, that doctor's probably going to have a different treatment plan for the both of you, okay, based on your presenting issues. Let us be the doctors in the nonprofit to say, housing first for you, perfect. Get you in right away. Housing first for you, probably not. You're going to be cooking a meth lab and you're going to burn the whole thing down, okay? That's the reality. So there's a lot of things we can do differently along those lines that would address the issue. And that's where you came in, is like have the political will to have those types of conversations.
We have time for one more question. We'll go right here.
What are your plans for an impact campaign and your call to action?
Plans for an impact campaign and a call to action.
Robert, do you want to talk about that? Jen. Let's get Jen out
Producer
there.
of the film.
New face, new voice.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Stolo, CEO of Robert Craig Films and producer of these films as well, too. This is our amazing, amazing cast and production crew. So, yes, call to action, right? This is not a film. This is not a documentary. This is not what you may not have even heard tonight, a novel, a study guide, and a soundtrack. This is a movement, and that is really what we're trying to do, is call to action, a no-address movement to really bring people to a place where people become more compassionate and empathetic about this cause, right? We can all walk down the street, we can turn a blind eye, we can walk over someone, but at the end of the day, they tell us all the time they're invisible, and we want to change that perception. We want people to see people for who they are. They're human beings just like the rest of us. Just like you heard tonight, this could happen to anyone, and we have heard those stories. So at the end of the film, the feature film, No Address, there will be a call to action from our amazing cast who will call to the audience to say, this is what you can do. And there's simple things, right? We can all go volunteer at a nonprofit organization. And does that mean Thanksgiving and Christmas? No. It's all year long, right? People are on the streets or in these organizations or in these shelters all day long. And so our encouragement is this is something we can all do every day. How do we do that? You can financially donate to an organization if you can't volunteer. Give your time, treasures, talents. But more or less, the simple thing is when you walk out here tonight, you're going to walk by someone. And you know what? Don't be afraid to look them in the eye. I have heard so many times that someone says, someone just looked me in the eye and I felt human again. A few weeks ago, my husband knows that I walked down the street and I said, hello, sir, what's your name? And he looked at me like I asked him a trigonometry question. I mean, it was like, what are you saying to me, lady? And he turned to me and I said, I'm sorry, sir. I just wanted to know your name. And he said, I cannot remember the last time somebody asked me my name. And that like goes through you and through your soul as a human being. And so I challenge you, and that's what our call to action is, to challenge America, to change the hearts and minds and the way we see this situation. Because when you do, then you see it differently. And then it inspires us to do something. Inspiration inspires action, right? And action causes tangible change. And that's what we're here to do. And we're going to try that through our film that you just saw, the documentary that shows the real life of our country. You're going to see it in our feature film, No Address, that Billy Baldwin, Xander Berkeley, and some amazing cast are in there that showcase these stories that are inspired by the true stories that Julia has come across and what made her drive to create this screenplay. And then you can read the novel. You can listen to the audiobook that is narrated by Ashanti, and you can hear the soundtrack because music moves people. And we partnered with Jada Marcus of Rascal Flatts and his team to bring this soundtrack to life through Sony. So there's so many mediums that we believe that we will inspire people to see it all differently.
My personal hope is that one way or another, I've been waiting for this breakthrough to happen for years, that if people knew on a streaming service, if I watch this movie, no matter what, 50% of whatever I'm renting this thing for is going to go towards these nonprofits that are actually helping people. And I think that'll motivate people to watch. And then if they see it and they're further motivated, they're moved or inspired by the story in the movie, then they'll get further involved. But bottom line, on that basic level, people will be motivated to watch and not just turn away. And that's our hope for the success of this film. And Robert's agreed not only to put his own money up for all of this, but to give 50% of the profits to these nonprofits that have proven to have a great success rate. And I take my hat off to that.
Hats off to Robert.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you all. You've been moved and now you've been challenged. So there you go. So thank you all for coming to talk about this movie, and thank you all for coming.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.